Okay, we're live. I will first double check if there is any voice on the other end. Uh, okay, everything works just fine. Anyways, today on this special episode of Slower Podcast, I wanted to have another episode of the Slower Podcast about 1 month ago, but the guy just didn't show up. um,
Mm-hmm.
so now we're talking about a very important point. That I think not many people on the dissident right are really willing to go into, or perhaps, as I would say, are deeply misinformed. As you can judge by the title, today I brought up a Holocaust historian who deals with and debates, especially on the politically provoked channel, with Holocaust revisionists and Holocaust deniers. History speaks. Just right off the bat, I guess. What are your qualifications, or like how deep is your knowledge on the topic?
So what I bring to the table is, in terms of formal education, the highest degree I've attained thus far is a master's in history from the London School of Economics. I'm currently in the LSE, the London School of Economics, for a PhD. I'm pursuing a PhD. I've done, in terms of knowledge about the Nazi Holocaust in particular, I have learned German, and I read German fluently, and I speak it pretty well too.
Mhm.
Although I wouldn't say my speaking is at the level of my reading and writing. It's still good. And I've been to the Bundesarchiv, the German Foreign Office archives, and have done pretty extensive, and the U.S. Holocaust Museum archives have done like original research. There's a document I found that I think is pertinent to the Holocaust. I don't think anyone else has found. Um, I still kind of am sending that through to context. I'm excited about the document, but I'm sending it through to context to make sure everything is. I'll
Mhm.
use this word to provoke your audience, kosher, just to provoke your
Yeah.
audience.
Yeah.
but
Well, by the
but
way, we should
yeah,
also say that you're not Jewish. You're half
no,
Egyptian and half English, right?
correct, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Just in case.
Well,
Mm,
I'll get it anyway. I mean, I'm
yeah.
gonna post DNA at one point. Like,
Okay.
my mother's side is so pure Coptic. I mean, these people, they were cut off from European civilization
Hmm.
because of because of just the way Islam the Islam and Christian worlds were cut off after the conquest of Egypt, and they obviously couldn't marry with Muslims, or they had to convert to Islam. Otherwise, they wouldn't be Muslims a couple of generations later. So I think I'm like literally like 50.2% Egyptian,
Uh-huh.
given that Copts are pretty intermarried, and that mitochondrial DNA is little more than
Oh,
paternal. So it's no Jewish on
that's
either side.
interesting. Yeah. Well, your ancestors, they were an assimilated minority for a very
Yeah,
long time. So you're pretty much spiritually Jewish, you could say. Uh, a minority living in the dominant
yeah.
majority Muslim nation. But anyways, I ask you this, I ask you that. Why did you even do this? I guess would be the third
Hmm.
question. Like, why is it interesting to you, and why you think it's a good idea to like challenge Holocaust revisionists?
Well, it started rather differently. So I looked into the claims. I know your viewers will roll their eyes. I looked into the claims with an open mind. It wasn't as if I was going to say, if I found any revisionist claims compelling, that I would publish it and ruin my career. Of course not. But I just personally was interested
Hmm.
in this because I've noticed, as I think a lot of people have noticed, that there are a number of taboos constructed in our society that are ill-founded and are propped up by yelling and shrieking and stigmatization. And this has stigmatization, yelling and shrieking.
Hmm.
So I looked into it, and I found that the denial claims were just extremely weak. I mean, you have to, just because the establishment says something, whether it's um, some controversial claim on ethnicity or gender that we may be skeptical of, or it's don't eat shit, shit's bad for you. You have to look
Yeah.
into the specific claim. And I found the Holocaust denial was kind of like shit is good for you. It just was kind of pathetically founded. And then once I had done significant research, kind of just using the stuff I'd learned as a historian in my historical training, I got increasingly irritated when I saw these memes that were promoting falsehoods, lies, and kind of had a smugness. Like I call them fedora tippers, not original to me, of course, but kind of fedora tipping irritates me because I devote a lot of time to researching historical topics when I get into one. I had gotten into this because of original like interest in, oh my, are these people onto something, and finding that they certainly weren't. So I wanted to go public and kind of aggressively challenge them because I don't think they know what they're talking about. I think a lot of them are charlatans or fedora tippers, and the evidence is just very strong for this historical event.
Yeah, I've got something similar actually. I mean, although I never had any doubt about it, like like significantly, like millions of people died because I mean I grew up in Israel. Some of my ancestors,
Mm-hmm. We're killed,
they
yeah.
were killed in the Holocaust, and you know
Sorry to interrupt you, but I want to ask you what your ancestors. So were your ancestors from Jewish ancestors from the Soviet Union?
Well, here's the thing. They were living in Romania in
Mm,
1940.
mhm,
The Soviet Union, they've taken Bessarabia, and our
mhm,
family was divided. So
mm,
half portion of my family, they went to Siberia. They were kulaked, I guess, and the other half,
mhm.
we just never heard from them ever again.
Yeah.
After World War II. So that's basically what happened. I mean, like I assumed they were dead, but
Hmm.
people like Old Hype, they could say that well they were just sent to like some other place or
Right.
Atlantis or whatever.
Yeah.
So I did I didn't doubt that, but I
Hmm.
also thought like some of it was, exaggerated, and I really looked into it.
Hmm.
Funny enough, I started by like decided, well, let me first familiarize myself with mainstream sources, and lo and behold, like after 1 month of researching, I was just like deeply convinced in the mainstream narrative, you could say. Well,
Yeah.
the mainstream academic narrative. We can talk the mainstream cultural narrative if you want to, because I think that that's hugely problematic. But anyways, let me bring you to another question about like the state of the Holocaust in terms of academic debate. Because when we think about the Holocaust, we're thinking about this these cultural states like 6 million, this number, or people think 6 million died in gas chambers, for example, right? But what is the state of the Holocaust in the academic sphere, and most importantly, are there any debates about it?
Well, there certainly are no debates about kind of what I'd say are bottom line questions, and I think I'll in later in this introduction, when I have the chance to kind of explain what the evidence is that we know that the Holocaust, as it were happened beyond a reasonable doubt. There isn't debate about there was a systematic policy to exterminate the Jews by shooting, gassing, overwork, and starvation. There also isn't a debate about the numbers beyond like about 5 million is about as low as you'll go, and I'll get into that in the later in the introduction. How we know um, with precision these numerical estimates. Is it just arbitrary? No, we how we know this, but the debates continue to persist around questions of when exactly did the policy emerge, and the reason this continues to be a question is you have systematic killings of basically every Jew the Nazis can get their hands on by the summer of 1942. When the Holocaust begins, when, for example, the mass shootings in the Eastern Front began, following in summer 1941, following the German invasion of the Soviet Union, you have cases where Jewish children are shot in a village, an occupied village, or Jewish children are not shot, right? You have a case, and you have cases where the Nazis even seem to be talking about certain Western European Jewish populations won't be deported, right? We're just killing the Soviet Jews and the Polish Jews and the Russian Jews, but we can't kill Jews who are French citizens or Dutch citizens. So there is, I would argue that actually the decision comes quite late, comes in June 1942. I'm in the minority there. There are a few historians. Peter Longerich is a very prominent Holocaust historian who flirted with this view in a book about, I say a recent book. For historians, it's a recent book because we're slow, but he wrote this book, I think, in 2010, The Unwritten Order The Unwritten Order. He flirts with this view that it was June 1942, but a core debate remains: when exactly was this policy enunciated? The traditional view that Hitler had this scheme since he became Chancellor of Germany to exterminate the Jews. It's basically a fringe view at this point, because there just are too many. There are too many substantive immigration or ethnic cleansing proposals. Those notoriously the Havara transfer agreement in the early 1930s, where Jews actually were allowed to go to Palestine and to some extent facilitated their migration, allowed to carry at least some portion of their property. So I don't think in terms of when, there isn't really, there aren't really people who say Hitler's plan all along the way that this used to be claimed. So when continues to be a debate among historians. Also, where the initiative came. So there certainly were ad hoc gassing operations at the very beginning. So for example, and also geographically circumscribed. So for example, the first extermination camp, Kelmno, was planned in late 1941. However, this was just to be applied to initially. This was just to be applied to Jews in a certain region of Poland, the Wartime, which had been annexed by Germany. So with ambiguities like this, wow, this camp was just intended for a specific group of Jews. Questions are prompted: was this camp an ad hoc operation promoted by local leaders, or was Hitler saying kill the Wartime Jews, kill Jews of this specific region? This debate gets strawmanned by deniers who are like, haha, they're saying there was no order. No, of course there was an order, because, again, by summer of 1942, the policy is homogenous. It's kill the Jews you get your hands on, right? It's a homogenous policy. So obviously at some point there is an order by Hitler. But in terms of the first, let's say the first several months of this policy, where exterminations are happening, but they're not always happening and not happening everywhere, that has created ambiguity, which is debated by scholars as to who gave the order and whether who gave the initial order, let's say, to kill Jews, and whether this was an innovation at the local level that Hitler approved of and systematized, because obviously he must have, because it is systematic, or whether this was a Hitler initiative all along. Hitler was saying kill Jews of this particular region, and that continues to be debated. So who were the innovators behind the policy, let's say? Was it people at the local level, or was it people at the upper level? Yeah, I mean, also there are debates concerning kind of fringe groups like non-European Jews. A guy, Dan Mechman of Yad Vashem, wrote an essay, controversial essay, which I happen to agree with, by the way, several years ago, arguing that there was actually no specific plan or policy to exterminate Jews outside of Europe, right? And he cites as evidence, among other things, the fact that the non-European Jews are not mentioned in the Wannsee protocols. And moreover, that Tunisian Jews, even though Tunisia was occupied by the Nazis, Tunisian Jews were not exterminated in 42, 43 when it was occupied by the Nazis. So it's kind of these peripheral debates, also debates regarding who were the innovators behind the policy. Again, this position is strawmanned as if one is saying Hitler never. No, of course he did. Like, it becomes homogeneous. Hitler must have given an order, right? And there, as I'll talk about, there's evidence he did. But actually, the document I found in the archives, which is the document I'm kind of vesting right now, talks about der Befehl des Führers. So, like, it's talking about the order of the Führer is known and it talks about exterminating Jews. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously an order was given. But the question is, were the early mass killings, which were not happening everywhere in Europe, and were not even always happening to all Jews? It could have sometimes, for example, children were spared in the early Einsatzgruppen mass shooting. Sometimes they weren't. Sometimes they were massacred. But there's a heterogeneity of the early mass killings, which there aren't in in by summer of 42, and that has led historians to ask, well, given the heterogeneity, maybe it wasn't a uniform policy at the beginning. Maybe there was some element of innovation, or so, at least some like give and take from leadership. Like, yeah, this is good. We like what you're doing. Keep it up, boys.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the kind of debates. Now, the question of like whether Auschwitz was an extermination camp or whether the figure was 5 million or 300,000. This is like internet
Yeah,
debate.
yeah, yeah. Anyways, so basically, the purpose of the stream is to answer the questions that were asked by Holocaust revisionists. We prepared 12, but before that, I promised to History Speaks that he will answer, and also there'll be a lot of questions for me. I'm personally curious at the end. Uh, you know, asked me to like give him like 10 minutes 15 minutes to summarize basically the literature so far that proves the existence of the Holocaust, and hopefully that will also provoke a few questions which he can later answer
Yeah,
at the end.
I would just modify what you said, Ubersource, slightly. I'm referring here to documents, many of which I have
Mhm.
original copies of. Some of which obviously I saw in books and so on, but many of which I actually have literally original copies of. So um, let me know when I can take it away, and I'll do that.
Wait, look, just just please answer one question, or I
Sure.
answer it.
Okay, let's do it.
Just right now,
Yeah.
a guy who probably didn't understand what you meant last time, when you were speaking
Uh-huh.
previously, he said, "So 5 million or 300,000 is not important."
Yeah.
If you could address that.
I think I must have either misspoke or you misheard me, because what I was saying is nobody. The question isn't important because it's regarded as an absurdity. Of course, it wasn't 300,000. It was, you know, and the lower range estimate somewhere around 5 million, right? So the question's unimportant in the sense that it's an absurdity. That's the view of historians, right?
That it's not debated, that it's settled
Right.
already.
No, well, it's like it's not debated in the sense that George Washington was alive in 1960 is not debated.
Yeah. Anyways, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Uber Soy. And listeners and so on, I'm going to try to be as provocative as I can in order to inspire your questions. And it'll be your questions soon enough. So just sit tight. Okay. Why do we know beyond a reasonable doubt the Holocaust happened? So, first, really briefly, and just bear with me because I'll go quickly, I want to just talk about epistemology and history for like 50 seconds. So, what is history about? History is about creating positive narratives based on evidence to explain phenomena. That's what history is in a nutshell. That's how Western historiography has worked in the last, in the Enlightenment, essentially, or at least since Leopold von Ranke. So you have phenomena, you try to craft narratives with positive evidence. So we have a phenomena here. The fact is that millions of Jews, a phenomenon here regarding World War II, and we need to explain. The fact is that millions of Jews were deported to Nazi camps, the Action Reinhardt camps and the main concentration camps, and vanished in the camps. So we know from documents like the Hofla Telegram, the Korher Report, various deportation statistics regarding Auschwitz, for example, which we have, that many millions of Jews were deported to the camps. And by, for example, early 1942, before the death marches, when they're still in the camps, the Jews who are there, we know that there's a total of 700,000 persons in the camps, half of whom aren't even Jewish, because the camps had people of all ethnicities. So you had many millions, and I'll talk more specifically about those figures in a bit. And by the end of the war, you have 350,000, really maximally, Jews alive. So you have millions and millions of Jews disappearing in Nazi custody. That is a phenomenon that requires explanation, right? So as a historian, you look at that phenomenon, well, all these people disappeared, and you have to come up with an explanation, a narrative with evidence. So the Holocaust deniers do one of two things. They either just say, I don't know what happened. I don't care. Fritz Berg said that, famous denier. I don't care what happened to the Jews who vanished. Or they say, well, the Jews were actually channeled out of the camps and resettled somewhere. They were resettled, which doesn't sound logically absurd. But then when you think about it for 2 minutes, you realize, wait a minute, they're claiming that a city, a country of millions of Jews existed with this resettlement theory. And we have zero evidence of it. So they're claiming Jews were, the reason Jews disappeared was they were channeled out of the camps and resettled. We have zero evidence, no infrastructure, no letters, no economic activity, no residue of buildings, nothing, zero, of this community of millions of people which supposedly existed, really a country or a city in the 1940s Europe. So total absurdity. They have no explanation for this phenomenon of the disappearing Jews in Nazi custody, or they have an explanation that is absurd in its face and has no evidence, or they just say, I don't know what happened. So they're kind of out of the game of history in terms of explaining this phenomenon of millions of Jews disappearing in Nazi custody. Now, we say they were killed. That's our explanation as historians, and we have a ton of evidence. So now let me get into what that evidence is. So the first category of evidence I would talk about is non-coercive confessions. What I mean by that are confessions that are not given in trial, where even a fair trial, you can talk about Nuremberg fair, or have your viewers, I'm sure, say unfair. Even a fair trial, circumstances are coercive. There can be an incentive to make a plea in a certain way, right? You can be innocent in theory and plead guilty to get a lighter sentence, for example. But we have all kinds of confessions by the Nazis in totally non-coercive contexts outside of trial. So, for example, Albert Speer, who was Hitler's Minister of Armaments, who actually at Nuremberg denied knowledge of the Holocaust, wrote in a letter on 23 December 1971 to a Belgian resistor, there is no doubt as to the Holocaust. I was present as Himmler announced on 6 October 1943 that all Jews would be killed. So Speer is saying, yeah, I knew about it. Why would he say that? In a totally non-coercive context, he didn't have to write this letter. He wasn't under interrogation. But he says, I was there. Jews were going to be exterminated, according to Himmler. Adolf Eichmann, before he was captured by the Israelis in Argentina, talking to Nazis who wanted him to deny the Holocaust. So there was a group of Nazis in Argentina who were like, this is fake. We don't believe this happened. Tell us the truth, Eichmann. And Eichmann's like, I'm sorry, guys. The policy was extermination. This is 1957 to Wilhelm Sasson and others. So why would Eichmann say this? There's no coercion. They want him to say it didn't happen. But he's saying, yeah, the extermination happened. Haj Amin al-Husseini. I read his memoirs. His memoirs, I can read Arabic. His memoirs were published in Palestine magazine, or Palestinian magazine. This would be Palestine magazine, but regardless, get off of that. In between 1967 and 1975, he said, Himmler told me in 1943, 3 million Jews so far had been killed, right? And again, that's not the end of the Holocaust. So he said it. Why would he say it if it didn't happen? He's not under pressure. He's in the Middle East. He's not being prosecuted for anything. But he said, yeah, the policy was extermination. And incidentally, his writing in this regard disappointed a lot of Arabs who were Holocaust deniers and wanted to take away that the Holocaust as a rhetorical move for Israel, as they saw it. Gustav Wagner was the former commandant of Sobibor. He was in Brazil. He was protected by the Brazilian Supreme Court from extradition to Germany. But he says on the BBC in 1979, I didn't think it was right, I'm reading now. One saw these people, these Jews being exterminated who were really innocent, but there was nothing I could do. The maxim was the Führer's orders must be carried out. So I could go on. I'm not going to go on these non-coercive confessions, but I just would ask, how do you explain the fact? Imagine you were falsely accused of like molesting children or murdering children or something, just the most horrible thing ever. Could you imagine if you're not being tortured, if there's no coercion, if you're talking to friends and family in a private context, just confessing to something you didn't do, and then all these people doing it? It's an absurdity on its face. The next species of evidence I'd talk about deniers, I hope you're getting provoked into realizing how stupid your beliefs are. The next species of evidence I'd talk about are contemporaneous war documents. So that is to say, documents from the Axis and Nazi leaders, from the Nazis and Italian fascists, Hungarians, and so on, that talk about the exterminations happening. So I'll try to read some of these quickly. If I'm getting a little too repetitive, Obersoy, let me know. But so Hans Frank, the head of the general government, which was German-occupied Poland, he was the top administrator in the region where the extermination camps were. So here's Hans Frank on 16 December 1941. This speech is recorded in his diary. I've started negotiations for the purpose of having the Jews pushed off to the east. But what should be done with the Jews? Do you believe that they will be accommodated in settlements in the east? In Berlin, we were told, why are you making all this trouble? Liquidate them yourselves. Gentlemen, I must ask you to steel yourselves against all considerations of compassion. We must destroy the Jews wherever we find them and wherever it is all possible. Another quotation. That's Hans Frank on 16 December 1941. Another quotation from Robert Lai, the head of the German Labor Front, on 20 May 1942. I have this speech actually in audio form in my Google Drive. We swore we will not give up the struggle until the last Jew in Europe is annihilated and dead. So dead. He uses the term dead, gestorben. He says dead. Next, let's grab my thing. Okay. The author mentioned Hans Frank, head of the general government, on 24 August 1942. He says, and I'm looking at an original copy right now of this, that and I'm translating it, that we sentence 1.2 million Jews to death by hunger in Poland is only marginally noted. It is self-evident that if the Jews do not starve to death, hopefully there is a speeding up in the anti-Jewish measures. So he's saying we sentence 1.2 million Jews to death by hunger. If they don't starve to death, hopefully the anti-Jewish measures, meaning deportation to death camps, speed up. It's not just in the German documents. It's in the fucking Italian fascist archives. So the absurdity of denial is you'd have to claim not only that German documents were forged, but that Italian documents were forged in order to justify the thesis. So, for example, a note from the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 4 November 1942 reports that the contents of a telegram So this telegram, which was sent to the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, states regarding Jews deported to the east that they are eliminated by means of gassing. So that is what Italian intelligence, the Italian Foreign Office believed at the time. The Jews deported to the east were eliminated by means of gassing. So not something the Soviets made up, something the Italians believed in 1942. I'll try to move a little faster because there's so much of this stuff. There's a 26 October 1942 order from Himmler, which legalizes the murder of Jews by SS men so long as their motive isn't personal, greed, sexual, or whatever. So if you kill a Jew out of political anti-Semitism, it is legal. There's literally an order from Himmler saying this, right? So it's legal to kill a Jew as long as your motive is political anti-Semitism, can't be greed, sexual sadism, wanting to steal, etc. And this principle was actually applied on 24 May 1943 to in the case of one Taubner. So this guy killed Jews and did so in a sadistic fashion, took pictures of it, and was court-martialed, right? So we might think, oh, that's evidence for the revisionist position. Well, listen to the judgment. The accused shall not be punished because of his actions against the Jews as such. The Jews have to be exterminated, and none of the Jews killed is any great loss. The accused should have recognized that the extermination of the Jews was the duty of commandos, and he also shouldn't have engaged, just to summarize this rather than spend forever reading, he shouldn't have engaged in sadism, taken pictures, and so on, but not convicted of murder and killing the Jews in and of itself, the judgment makes clear, is not the problem here. The problem is, the cruel manner in which he did it, the kind of voyeurism and so on. Okay. I'm going to skip one of the documents, the Hagen report, because I want to get through this so you guys can ask questions. Mm-hmm. Adolf Hitler So here's Adolf Hitler to Horthy in 17 April 1943, talking about the Polish Jews. So he's talking about the Jews of Poland. What happened to them? Horthy is the leader of Hungary. He's saying, this is Hitler. If they could not work, they had to perish. They were dealt with like tuberculosis that could infect a healthy body. This was not cruel if one considered that even innocent beings such as deer had to be killed to avoid spreading pandemics or whatever. Why should one spare the beasts that wanted to bring us Bolshevism? So that's Hitler. If they could not work, they had to perish. Doesn't sound like the denier theory to me of resettlement. Sounds like the mainstream theory that Jews were used as slave labor, or if they couldn't work, they were killed. Himmler in Posen, 6 October 1943. To quote Himmler, we were faced with the question, what about the Jewish women and children? I decided to find a clear solution to this problem too. I did not consider myself justified to exterminate the men, he says, ausrotten. But then he says, in other words, to kill them or have them killed. And I flag ausrotten because deniers say, oh, this is metaphorical, it doesn't actually mean kill. Well, then he says, in other words, to kill them. He uses the word umbringen, which is literally to kill. In other words, to kill them and have them killed and allow the avengers of our sons and grandsons in the form of their children to grow up. The difficult decision had to be made to make these people disappear from the earth. So that's what he's saying. The decision was to make these people, these Jews, disappear from the earth. So I'm not going to go through all of these because I want to get to the questions. Yeah. So how much should I maybe do this for 5 more minutes?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So Horthy, the leader of Hungary, in March 1944, also says that the Jews are being massacred, and he basically says Hitler is upset with me. He's angry with me because I don't want to let the Hungarian Jews be massacred. Again, he's an ally of Hitler. He's not some kind of hostile force promoting propaganda. He's in the Axis. He's an Axis leader, and he's saying Hitler is reproaching me because I'm not allowing our Jews to be massacred. So I could get into specific detail about the Einsatzgruppen, the Action Reinhardt camps, Auschwitz. I don't know. Should I do that, or do you want to go to questions?
Well, I'm looking at the audience engagement. Nobody really asked any questions about what you were saying in particular. They were just making broad statements. I think later when this video will be published and people will see, hopefully somebody would actually engage with what you have to say. But, unfortunately, it's just too specific, specific knowledge that usually no Holocaust denier is even aware of that. They're just asking like broad questions. Well, what about like the lampshades or old humans?
Yeah. Okay.
That's the questions for now,
So,
and basically that's also the questions that were asked for the interview before.
So let me just summarize in 1 minute.
Okay.
There's like a bazillion things I wanted to mention, but I think given the context of this, we should do it in 1 minute. So, okay. So as I said, what is the evidence for our narrative? There is all these confessions with no coercion whatsoever. There's all these wartime documents from Axis leaders, not talking about the Allies, from Axis leaders who have no propaganda interest in saying we're killing Jews if they're not asserting this. And then there also are the specific elements of the Holocaust. So the specific elements of the Holocaust are the Einsatzgruppen mass shootings. About 1.3 million Jews were shot, civilians, by the Einsatzgruppen, who were divisions of the SS who were sent to the occupied Soviet Union after the German invasion of the Soviet Union. About 1.3 million Jews were shot by them. This is documented in the own reports of the Einsatzgruppen, which I was going to quote, but I don't think I will. It doesn't seem like the right context for that.
Yeah.
Their own reports, also the Jaeger report and many others. Then a little under 2 million Jews were killed at the Action Reinhardt camps, especially Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. And there's a lot of evidence for that, including a document from Himmler, which says the Jews of Bialystok were killed. These were Jews sent to Treblinka. The Stroop report, which says being sent to Treblinka is a form of execution. You also have archaeological evidence, digs, identification of mass graves in Belzec, Sobibor. The Korher report, which says that the Jews sent to the Reinhardt camps have left Europe through special treatment, which Sonderbehandlung is the Nazi code word for killing. I can, and if someone doubts that, I can answer that. And then also Auschwitz, you have, where about 1.1 million Jews were killed. You have documents referring to the building we say was a gas chamber as a Vergassungskeller. You have orders for gas-tight doors with peepholes, orders for hydrogen cyanide detectors, documents attesting to just a vast cremation capacity that is obviously genocidal in nature, given that you're going to cremate virtually the vast majority of the inmates and the Jewish inmates in quick order, and so on. I don't think I'll get into all of that stuff because I want to give your viewers a chance. But
Yeah.
I think I've made my point that there's a ton of evidence for this, and that you need to have, again, if you want to engage in history, you need to have a positive narrative. You can't just be a nihilist and say, oh, this one testimony is wrong in X, Y, Z way. You have to develop a narrative with evidence to explain the underlying phenomena, which is all these Jews disappearing in Nazi custody.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think that will ever happen, but everyone who is willing to challenge history speaks. Now it's their time, because we'll be reading out the questions. So the first question was asked both on Telegram and Twitter, and it is the following: Why did the Nazis not do 5,000 Babi Yars, taking people over pits and shooting them, over building these mass industrial death camps? I understand the labor component, but many of these camps are killed almost immediately.
Right. So the problem with the mass shooting method was that it was exacting a terrible psychological cost on the murderers. And therefore, the SS leadership, not wanting to lose a generation of what they regarded as the finest German men, opted for a more impersonal style of killing. And that is why you get the switch from mass shooting to gassing in these special industrial style facilities, because it facilitated killing in a highly impersonal fashion.
So there's a follow-up to it. Nazis wouldn't just have paramilitary shoot people because it would hurt their fifis doubt.
Their fifis, feelings?
Feelings.
Oh, no, look, they're human beings. I mean, their human reaction to shooting women and kids, or even male non-combatants, I would say is similar for Nazis, as for SS, some kids who are in the SS and believe in this ideology, as it is for other human beings. So I don't find that compelling.
Yeah, and there are lots of questions which we already went over. So I'll just have to you went over. I'll just have to repeat them. Why is there a lack of mass graves at AR camps despite numerous excavations?
Well, there aren't a lack of mass graves. So
yeah.
Let me actually get my notes here really quick because I want to identify the correct number. Okay, so at Belzec alone, dozens of mass graves have been found with ash. And these mass graves, according to probably the most prominent Holocaust denier around, the most prominent guy, could accommodate 170,000 people. So that's what the Holocaust denier says. Now he's wrong. It's actually far more, because he's underestimating what percentage are children. But even he makes a weird argument like, oh, the Nazis in other places didn't bury people so tightly, so they couldn't have here. It's a very strange argument. But even Carlo Matonio, the point is, says these graves are big enough for 170,000 people. The figure I give is about 430,000. But because he underestimates the number of children, also underestimates how emaciated these people were. But my point is, even the most prominent Holocaust denier in writing, Matonio, admits dozens of mass graves were found at Belzec, capable of accommodating huge numbers of people. 7 mass graves, huge mass graves, were also found in Sobibor. In Treblinka, as far as I know, there hasn't been like an excavation. We haven't identified, as with Belzec and Sobibor, where the mass graves are. And there are some religious objections, as I understand it, to like non-invasive excavation. But I believe that there was radar work and so on, which found disturbances in the soil. There was a guy, Richard Kriega, denier, who claimed there's no disturbances in the soil, therefore no mass graves. But his report was never published, and he ran away like
Mhm.
20 years ago. So
Well, why do
yeah,
you think it wasn't published? Holocaust revisionists would probably say that he was censored.
I don't know. I just know he ran away
Oh,
before he was.
he ran away. You mean he didn't
Yeah, he didn't
publish because
publish
of
it.
himself?
I don't know. I
Uh-huh.
just know that he said I have these groundbreaking findings, and he never
But he never.
published it.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Well, I
but look,
mean, mhm.
I mean, why would you believe him when other camps we have found, and again, Nathaniel, your leading guy, deniers, doesn't deny this. We found at Belzec and Sobibor huge numbers of mass graves. So yeah, we haven't, in the level of detail, found the mass graves at Treblinka yet. We haven't excavated it because of religious objections, but I don't think we have
Yeah.
them at the other Reinhardt camps. We have found
Yeah,
them.
I mean, I suppose if he had the evidence and the academia were censorious to him, he could have published it on his website or on his blog, but he didn't do that. Anyways, the next question is not entirely grammatically correct, but I hope you will understand it. I'm not entirely I didn't entirely understand it, but I'll read it out. I'm not a revisionist, but I'd be interested in their opinion, I guess our opinion, on
Mm-hmm.
to what degree the things that caused the Ukraine to be so complicit in the Holocaust and then still persist to this day, if at all. Um,
Mm-hmm. Interesting question, actually. I said actually, I shouldn't have said that, but it is an interesting question. So the case of Ukraine is quite complicated because the Nazis. So first of all, I think as everybody knows, the Ukrainians had many reasons to despise the USSR because of the Holodomor. So that part is easy. So that gives you some insight as to why they'd be
mhm,
sympathetic to the Nazis. In terms of Western Ukrainians, meaning Ukrainians in the general government, right? Um, uh, Occupied by the Nazis. Ukrainians were, which was Polish majority, right? Ukrainians in this region were actually treated a lot better by the Nazis because they were being used as a wedge against the Polish majority, who was subject to
mhm,
all kinds of inhumanities, genocidal policies, and so on. And they felt that they needed some portion of the population firmly in their camp. So among these Ukrainians, you have the Holodomor history, and then you also have Nazis treating you relatively well. So I think that explains why there were so many collaborators. Now, in Eastern Ukraine, Reich Commissariat Ukraine, the Nazis under Koch showed their um, true attitude toward Ukrainians and the Slavic subhumans and subjected them to
mhm.
horrible genocidal policies. So there's actually a strange mix between West and East regarding Nazi policy toward the Ukrainians. But I think for the reasons I talked about, Western Ukrainians were eager to collaborate with the Nazis in some cases. And actually, today, even Banderism in Ukraine is much stronger in the West than the East, according to polling, which I think makes sense
Well, I
given this.
think now it's strong in both the West and
Yeah.
the
Oh no, 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 no. Yeah, I'm thinking as a
Mhm.
historian. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
now it's they all hate Russians now. I mean, I imagine.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Kind of sad. I mean,
It
Russia
is
did
sad.
such a
Anyways,
stupid thing.
let's not, yeah, talk about it.
Yeah, but historically
Massive.
speaking, there was this big
Yeah,
East-West
yeah,
divide,
that's
and the
true.
West would have had much more collaboration with Nazis
Yeah,
for the reasons I talked about. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, well, let's go next. Not a revisionist, but I'd appreciate if you touched on the idea of the Holocaust taking place in an impossibly short time span.
I'm not sure what the question refers to. We could
Well,
talk about cremation. We could talk about cremation a bit.
well, I think it's about, this whole meme that you had these ovens and the 6 million cookies,
Right.
and there's not
No, no.
enough time
Yeah. I think
to.
it's about. I think this question relates to cremation. So I'm gonna interpret it like that. So the problem with this meme is people are extrapolating data from their local ma and pa funeral home and how fast they burn corpses with like modern labor laws, and obviously not seeking to burn as many corpses as quickly as possible. Whereas in Auschwitz, you have the cremas running continuously throughout the day, which builds up heat. It's not like the ma and pa funeral home where they go on break and they turn the cremas off. You have the cremas running continuously. You have a mass number of slave laborers working around the clock. You burn multiple bodies at once, and you design your cremas to have dimensions to accommodate the burning of multiple bodies at once and to with an eye for speed only. So the Nazis were aiming at speed, cremation speed. which meant cremating multiple bodies at once, running the cremas continuously, which allowed for less fuel to be used and less time to be taken because you have built up heat as an alternative source of energy. You don't just need fuel. Whereas your local ma and pa cremation is going to have the cremas turn on and off, go to lunch, not be around the clock, go home at 5 o'clock, and have totally different aims. The aim is not to burn as many bodies as fast as possible. It's illegal to cremate multiple bodies. So trying to extrapolate about cremation capacity at Auschwitz, which was intended, we have good documents on this incidentally, to cremate as many bodies as quick as possible with the commercial cremation in the United States today is just stupid. I mean, you're just comparing apples and oranges. So yeah, if you had a bunch of ma and pa homes in Nebraska trying to burn bodies, they wouldn't be able to do this so fast, but that wasn't the situation.
Yeah, I mean, I just also wanted to add that the 6 million figure, they were never in the concentration camp. I think about 3 million or 2.7, which
Correct.
is estimated by Roel Hilberg.
Correct.
War in concentration camp. So
more than about 3.3 million were deported to the camps. But you're quite correct that 6 million were not burned at Auschwitz.
Yeah, well, just in the
I also one follow up on cremation too. Sorry about that, but also funeral pyres were used when the cremas were over capacity. So this problem that these glib idiots are talking about, oh, Cookie Monster, it actually did arise despite all of the different variables I talked about, like burning multiple bodies at once, running the cremas continuously, massive slave labor, working around the clock. They still ran out of capacity, were over capacity, and they had to burn bodies on open air pyres. And there's
I do have like a personal question because when I was doing the research, I couldn't quite figure out this. How many people have died in the gas chambers entirely, if there is any estimate? And like, I'm also curious about like non-Jews who also died. I know a lot of Soviet POWs were also in concentration camps. Like, if you have anything on that, I would appreciate.
So I'll answer the question in reverse. The Soviets, so the Nazis had genocidal intents and engaged in genocide against Russians and Poles and other Slavic groups, not just Jews. So in Auschwitz in 1942, a lot of people don't know this, not only Jews, but also Poles and Russian POWs were selected for gassing in Auschwitz. So, or killing by lethal injection was another way. So these people were killed, right, by gassing, by lethal injection, and so on. By 1943, 1944, the policy had changed. The Germans were losing the war, and they recognized we have to treat these Eastern peoples better because we want them as collaborators, right? We want them to fight for us. We want them as cannon fodder. We need everything we can. So the early view, which was their inferiors, fuck them, kill them, enslave them, this was changed, and no longer were Jews selected for no longer were non-Jews at Auschwitz selected for murder. So if you were like a Polish child in Auschwitz in 1943, you were no longer selected for gassing. It may have been very limited selections, but this didn't happen at anything like the scale. In terms of Jews, I would estimate somewhat under 3 million were gassed. We know this because if you look at, we have very good data about the number of Jews deported to the Actio and Reinhardt camps. It's a little under 2 million. We have the Hofla telegram and the Korher report, which talk about the number of Jews deported there, and among other sources. And we know that virtually all Jews there were killed by virtue of gassing. There weren't a lot of Jews selected for labor. Regarding Auschwitz, it's a bit more ambiguous. I would say about 80% of Jews were selected for gassing right away. And of the 20%, many of the who were selected for slave labor, many of these were eventually gassed too, and they no longer were able to be useful. So
what about the Gentiles at the early stage of the war stage?
I don't have precise statistics about the number of Gentiles
Uh-huh.
gassed, and I'm not sure if those
Yeah,
are
I mean, I
available.
remember reading Raoul Hilberg about the destruction of European Jewry. He didn't really mention that much about.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's my shortcoming. It may well be, or if it's the data we just don't have good
Yeah,
estimates.
that's very unfortunate. All
The
right,
reason
I'll
with the
skip.
Jewish
Mhm.
with the Jewish the reason with the Jewish policy, we have a good idea is because we know that at the FP and Reinhardt camp, substantially all of them were gassed, and we know how many were deported there. And we also know that now, because again, the Jewish policy by 42 is very homogeneous, right? So it's much more easy to make population estimates about Jews than about Slavs, which even in 42, when they were being selected for gassing, right? It was never as consistent as it were, right?
Mhm. Okay.
So,
So, here's a light question, I guess. And I mean, I'm not entirely sure if I need to ask you this, but
no, you can.
was Anna Frank's journal manipulated by her father? If that even,
First of all, I don't really
changes
see
anything.
the relevance of the
Yeah, yeah,
question.
yeah,
Frank's diary doesn't mention gas chambers. She's like a girl who's in hiding in the German Jew who's in hiding in Amsterdam, and like I guess the child traffickers took her at some point, the Nazis, right? So I guess
yeah, same. I
I
mean, I
guess
just decided to ask it because
no,
some
no, that's
people would
cool.
accuse me.
It certainly wasn't the claim that it was written with a ballpoint pen was adjudicated in court and found to be false. It wasn't a fake diary. Were there edits made? I can't say definitively there were not, but there's no evidence of it. I can
Okay,
say that.
well,
I will say
here.
this, and
Mhm.
the Anne Frank diary is not relevant to our understanding of the Holocaust. It's a cultural symbol, and I mean, I guess
Yeah.
if you're a sociopath, you can cheer the trafficking of a 14-year-old girl, but I mean, I don't. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not entirely like sure. I haven't read it. I've read The
Mm-hmm.
Night by Ellie Wise,
Visa,
or
yeah.
well, Weasel. Yeah, it was
One point I want to
assigned to
make
me in
about
high school.
these memoirs, like I mentioned in my opening, I would have gone into Einsatzgruppe and Ragtime, but
Uh-huh.
just got the intuition that like people are fucking bored of this. Even deniers are bored somehow. They shouldn't be because it's like showing how dumb they are, but they were. But uh, the kind of documents I mentioned earlier, contemporaneous wartime documents, and also like confessions by perpetrators in non-coercive contexts, are what I find compelling, and forensic evidence and so on are what I find compelling. I don't find memoirs compelling because
Mm-hmm.
there are all kinds of problems with memoirs.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, I think these texts like Wiesel are of psychological interest,
Yeah.
but they're only of secondary historical value.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't particularly enjoy them. I also recommend reading the book "The Holocaust Industry" by Norman
I've
Finkelstein.
interviewed
He goes
Finkelstein.
into.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have seen it. That was a very good interview.
Yeah. By the way,
um,
though, the politicization, and I'll let you talk a bit over story because I would talk most of the time, but I rely on the interviewee to be fair.
mhm.
But the politicization of an event doesn't. There's no logical connection between that and whether the event happened. Like, if you say
Yeah,
slavery in the United States is politicized or isn't politicized, whatever your view on that is, it doesn't bear on whether slavery happened, right? So,
exactly. Anyways, I forgot what I wanted to say, but it doesn't really matter. Well, here's a very angry question, and it's a very long question, and I haven't like
read it,
even
read it.
included
I want an angry one.
everything, but
Yeah.
yeah, it has like tons of questions in it. It's like a few
All right,
paragraphs.
let's
Yeah,
excavate them from this
well,
rant. Yeah.
sure. There is no information about concentration camps in any German info, even though
Mm.
we have cracked the Enigma code. We could find out about secret weapons of Reich thanks to breaking their codes, but no information ever there was about plans of mass extermination in camps. Almost all pictures from camps are showing people with typhus. All pictures of bodies are not looking like gassed. There is no mass graves. There is no pictures despite air photos of any place to hold a coal or any fuel to power crematoriums. Cyclone B was used during war times to decontaminate dentists, midwives, pools, soccer field. why would the
Mm-hmm.
Germans even bother with
Mm-hmm.
building it for people they wanted to exterminate? All
Mm-hmm.
camps that were inspected, all camps that were inspected only by the USSR were death camps, but not a single one by
Yeah.
allies. What was
Yeah, I'll answer some of these, and then remind me of them because there's so many to remember. But I'll go after some of these. So first of all, like Auschwitz was when he talks about the pool,
yeah.
Auschwitz was not just for Jews. Auschwitz was a camp, like basically like a city, with and basically 3 concentration camps contained within it. Auschwitz one, Birkenau, where the Jews were
Mhm.
killed, and Monowitz. And the pool was not where the pool and this and the soccer team pictured in these like the greatest story never told or whatever. The soccer team was that is in the greatest story never told. That was of British POWs, so that's nothing to do with Jews. The swimming pool was not in Birkenau, nothing to do with Jews. I guess it's possible that capos could have had access to some of these facilities. These are Jews who were helping with the extermination, had like, totally different life in
Mhm,
Auschwitz. While they
mhm.
were allowed to live, their life was totally different. But for, virtually all Jews, these is just irrelevant because it was used by other people in this vast camp far away from them, right? So, if we're talking about like specifically the pool, that's not in Birkenau. It's not where the Jews were killed, right? So not relevant, and just shows a misunderstanding of really basics. What was the? Oh yeah, no extermination camps. Not true. The Allies liberated Natzweiler, the Western Allies, which has an intact gas chamber that you can see today. There was an experiment done by August Hirt of the Strasbourg Anatomical Institute that we have all the documentation, where he ordered Jews to be sent in order for gassing and so on. He asked the SS for this, and they agreed, and they sent Jews. So we have proof of homicidal gassings. We also had the bodies autopsied by Western Allies in a camp in the West. So that's false. In fact, Natzweiler is ironically for this meme the only gas chamber that's still intact is the Natzweiler one because it was used at a much smaller scale, right? But vastly
Mhm.
smaller scale, but still was used. And the people murdered in these gassings were autopsied, where they found in the Strasbourg Anatomical Institute, which was nearby Natzweiler. So that's false. What were the other questions? Like, oh yeah, there's no camps. I mean, I don't really think
Yeah,
that's.
there like
I,
there's
I think I am
no
assuming that was a typo.
documented evidence. There's no documented.
I'm assuming it was a typo to say there's no camps because that's just absurd. Um, like in terms of there's no
Yeah,
evidence.
Dachau is a big one liberated by the Allies.
Yeah, in terms of Dachau didn't have, as far as we know, uh, there actually was apparently a gas chamber there, but there's no evidence it was ever used.
Well,
So,
I know. Yeah, I mean, it was a concentration camp. I
oh
know
right,
that
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
half a hundred
Well,
thousand
camps
people died
existed.
there.
Right. They're pictures of the camps. I mean, so I don't. I think that was a typo by this guy. I'm assuming because he also talked about the swimming pool at Auschwitz. So he apparently believes that existed, which it did. But
Well, I mean,
um,
it's very popular among Holocaust
that's
revisionists. Like
just the
almost
stupidest
everyone
meme.
believes in
Just
that.
learn about Auschwitz. Auschwitz was not just for Jews. Auschwitz was massive, and the swimming pool was not in Birkenau. I mean, guys, this isn't that difficult. Like, it's not. It got just
Yeah.
5 minutes. This is Wikipedia level research. Jesus Christ.
Well, I assume they watched the greatest story never told
Yeah,
or
and they have
the
these
Europa
pictures of
Last Battle, and that
British
convinced them.
POWs. I mean, with respect to the West, the Germans were trying to conform to the Geneva Conventions, mostly.
Mhm.
So yeah, they treated British POWs at Auschwitz accordingly. Okay, totally
What
irrelevant.
about the Soviet POWs?
Oh, well, that's genocidal policy. I mean,
Yeah.
we have proof of that. Was there any other question? Oh no, there's no proof of. I mean, I would go back to my
Yeah, well,
introduction.
we
I'm
went
not
over
gonna
this.
bore you,
Yeah.
but they're all yeah they're there's a ton of
Yeah, I mean,
documentary evidence.
that's ridiculous.
Also, the Allies
Mhm.
with the Enigma, the Allies, the British knew about the extermination policies during the war. I'm not going to get into all the documents for this, but they knew about it,
Um,
and the reason and part of the reason they knew about it was, first of all, they knew about it from the Polish government and exiles reports, but they also knew about it because they saw some of the statistics I mentioned earlier, which is to say they saw from the Enigma decodes, they saw all these Jews coming into the camps, and then they saw rolls of the camps, and the population, obviously, the Jews had vanished, obviously, right?
Okay.
Because they compared incoming Jews to camp rolls. They were decoding all of this. In terms of why doesn't every document say we're killing Jews? I mean, are you an idiot? Like, think about if you were a criminal. If you're a criminal and you're involved, or like a gangster and you're involved in murder or like human trafficking, would you say I trafficked 50 women today? Like, criminals don't behave like this. This is just really stupid. Now, they do have numerous slip-ups. There are numerous slip-ups, as I mentioned, and private diaries and so on. But like, because standard bureaucratic procedure wasn't to say we murdered 80 children today. Although with the Einsatzgruppen documents, you get that. I mean, so you do get that a lot, but it wasn't always like this. I mean, it's obvious why. I mean, they wouldn't want the Western Allies to get a copy of a document like this and use it for propaganda purposes. But
okay, here is another question about Auschwitz. Where are the holes today in the underground, quote unquote, gas chamber of Auschwitz? What do you consider hard proof of the Holocaust, not easily falsifiable documents in brackets?
Yeah, okay. So in terms of the holes in the roof, we have to remember Krima's 2 through 5, so the main gas chambers at Auschwitz, were dynamited by the Soviets before, dynamited by the Nazis before the Soviet Red Army liberated Auschwitz. So in the 1990s, David Irving and Robert Forrester and others made a big deal about the fact that the holes are not clearly visible in Crema 2. However, funny enough, archaeologists later investigated these claims and they poked around, because again, these buildings have been dynamited, right? They're in ruins. That they poked around and they found the holes. So like the holes have literally been found. So you're gonna have to find another meme, guys, because or you have to say that the archaeologists are in a conspiracy. I haven't personally been to Auschwitz and seen the holes myself. I do actually want to do a research trip there at some point, but I can't say I've seen them, but there are archaeological studies that have identified the holes after this meme was now I was going crazy with this meme. What was the second part of the question?
What do you consider hard proof of the Holocaust? I think we kind of went over it.
Yeah, I think we went over that.
Let's skip it. So, another one, just a suggestion. It might be fairly illuminating to go over the history of the various estimates, total number of murdered Hebrews only, this and that camp, Einsatzgruppen killings, and etc. The sources for both the early good cause and inaccuracies are pedagogically used.
Well, there are two different questions here. So popular conceptions and then academics. So academic estimates have been relatively consistent since Hilberg published Destruction of European Jewry way back in, I think it was 61. I may be getting the date wrong, but the late 50s, early 60s, something like that. So 5 to 6 million. There have been like shoddy works, of course. Like Lucy Davidowitz said, like over 1 million were killed at Majdanek, which is a ridiculous estimate. Just totally unsupported by the deportation statistics. It's off by an order of magnitude or two. I don't know what is an order of magnitude. I don't even know. But generally speaking, 5 to 6 million with relatively constrained estimates for Einsatzgruppen mass shootings as well as deaths in Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec are pretty well agreed upon, because again, we know how many went in and we know how many came out, right? So, and we know that they were extermination facilities for the reasons I talked about. So we know that millions disappeared in these camps. We know how many, within a reasonable range, how many. And some of the ambiguities also come in how many, because part of the Holocaust is, when you mentioned your ancestors in Bessarabia, part of the Holocaust, it has always been considered the massacre of hundreds of thousands of Jews by the Romanians. So those data are debated as well, and but nevertheless, the estimates have been quite consistent. Now, in terms of popular estimates, like 4 million at Auschwitz, you get this in it comes out of a Soviet propaganda figure, and maybe an early confession by Huss that was coerced, or he says stupid, crazy things because he's being tortured. Or he doesn't remember. I don't know, but he says something false. I mean, those are easily discredited by the deportation statistic. Nowhere near 4 million people of all nationalities, forget Jews, all nationalities are deported to Auschwitz. So the first academic studies discredited that. So historians have never taken these crazy estimates seriously. There have been a couple really sloppy historians like Davidowitz who say, 1.5 million at Majdanek and so on. But the estimates have been generally quite consistent because of the sources and methods I refer to. Now, popular culture, I can't really speak to that in a highly specific sense what people believe now, but there certainly have been false beliefs over the years, which is, I think, common when you're talking about normies in history.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, people believe just Jews died.
Yeah,
They don't know about the general plan Ost,
you're right.
for
Or the
example.
POWs. Yeah,
Yeah,
that is that. Ironically, it's worse than people think because they don't know about these genocides of other populations, right? They just know about the Jews and maybe the
yeah,
Romani.
yeah,
So that's actually worse than what the regular person thinks.
yeah. Unfortunately, they only get like um, as Norman Finkelstein would say. Unfortunately, they would get a token recognition.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, a lot of like I know a lot of people who are Slavic and who are not Jewish, whose ancestors uh, came in contact with the Nazis. So for example, 25% of all population in Belarus was perished, and at least 5,000 villages were burned, and 600 of them were burned alive with their inhabitants. So I think it's a major problem that people aren't talking about. But that's just a small run.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'll go on. There are three questions left. So I guess the second one, sorry, the first one, also 6 million Jews, of dead Jews, is story told since 1900. We have a lot of press articles saying about 6 million of dead Jews before World War I. Haven't they just inspired with, the Nazis with that?
Well, I mean, you have to evaluate all these claims independently. You can't just say have a pure speculation that because a figure is given for X deaths in X year that the Holocaust didn't happen. So I just think it's a totally
Yeah, I mean,
illogical.
it's such a
And this wasn't an academic or intellectual
yeah,
statement. This is just like random newspaper headlines.
yeah. First of all, it wasn't just 6 million. It was 2 million. It was 4 million. It was
Right.
9 million.
Yeah.
The most common one was 5 million, and none of that was about genocide. Yeah, I mean, it's such a weird point. Yeah, but okay. Anyways, the second one, how do you think the Germans should have approached the Jewish population in 1933 onward? Which, I mean, like, it's another, I guess, question which may not
How do I think
benefit.
they should have done it?
Yeah, I mean,
I just find the question just absurd
yeah,
and
yeah,
like and also like as a historian I try to avoid. I think when it comes to genocide you can't avoid it entirely, but you should be trying to minimize moralism even in this context. So I think
yeah,
I think
yeah.
I won't answer that one.
I will just say they should not have done
They
it.
shouldn't
But
have engaged in child trafficking. Let's say
yeah,
that. Like that's
yeah.
bad. Also
So,
also
mhm.
of I mean I don't know why it. I guess child trafficking is okay when the Nazis do it, like of white Gentile children, according to neo Nazis. It's just bizarre that this is
Yeah,
excused.
a lot of
Yeah,
mhm.
I posted a picture of a Polish girl who was killed, Catholic, who was killed in Auschwitz, who was ethnically cleansed from her from her city Zamosk, which was by the way never German, right? It wasn't
Mhm.
part of traditional Greater Germany. It wasn't part of East Prussia or whatever. Ethnically cleansed, labeled as racially inferior. Again, a Catholic Polish girl sent to Auschwitz and murdered, presumably by lethal injection. So I don't. I don't know why that's excused, but apparently people are okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, at the early
Who claim to
stages.
love white
Mhm.
people? The people who
Yeah,
claim to be love white people, neo
exactly.
Nazis and white nationalists, are okay with the trafficking and murder
Yeah,
of a little white girl. So okay, I don't know what
yeah.
to say about that.
I know that accordingly with the general plan also, I think about 85% of ethnic Poles were to be like
Yeah,
permanently murdered.
yeah.
Um, is
And they were
what?
enslaved. The Germans brought
Yeah,
slavery back to Europe.
especially the Soviets, that they were trafficked right back.
Right,
They were called the Osterbiters, I think.
right. I
Uh,
mean, the Germans brought slavery back to Europe in the middle of the 20th century.
yeah,
That's what they did. So
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think like when we're speaking about the Holocaust, it's important that we also discuss the millions of non-Jewish deaths who have also occurred. I think the Holocaust Memorial Museum, they put it like the total estimate for the Holocaust is between 11 to 15 million.
right.
But unfortunately, a lot of the literature is focused only on Jews. It's
Yeah.
similar to how Holodomor is perceived as like and the Armenian genocide as only
Hmm.
the genocide of the people who basically got to tell their story. But if you're looking about the Holodomor, something like 40% of Kazakhstan population just literally died in a matter of like a year and a half, much more severe than Ukraine. But that's just a side run. So let me read you the last question,
Sure.
which is similar to what I was saying. And I mean, obviously, I disagree with the figures. So why don't you talk about 30 million Christians killed by communism in Russia and millions of Hindus and Muslims killed in India by Christian UK?
I mean,
So
why do I have to talk about what you? Historians can be interested in whatever subject they
yeah.
wish. I am interested in. Look, if you want to know why, it's because I'm, I'm a fluent reader of German, and my Russian is quite. I'm trying to learn, but it's quite primitive. I'd be embarrassed to say I
Mhm.
know it because I couldn't even speak. But like, yeah, so I don't know Russian. That's a problem. Also, Russian archives are going to be hard to visit for an American right now. Although I've actually been to the Russian archives before the war and
Mhm.
found some original entries of Goebbels' diary where he says like nations when they have the power should kill Jews like rats, and thank God we've thoroughly attended this in Germany. So I've actually found a diary where he said that.
Mhm.
So
Okay, so the questions are
By
finished.
the way, the figures are nonsense in that. But in that, I should
Okay,
mention that. But yeah,
let's read a few questions from the chat before I ask you like
mm.
a few blitz questions, and then we could end this. Um, so I'll scroll. I guess how would you prefer me to answer them from the top right or sorry from the top or from the
I don't
bottom?
have a preference.
Yeah. Okay. Why do I have to talk about what you Goyim asked me to? That's the latest question.
That's funny, honestly.
Yeah, okay. It's just a
Yeah,
comment.
I think it's kind of funny.
Why not have anyone on to challenge their rumblings or our rumblings? So yeah, good question, honestly.
Yeah. Actually, let me answer that. So
Okay.
your guys, Mike Enoch. So first of all, Mike Enoch agreed to debate with me and is running away. Like just very unmanly, dishonest to do that. He's clearly running away, despite having publicly agreed to it. Alt Hype didn't agree, to be fair to him, but he runs away when I ask him for a debate or even a conversation. Right? It doesn't have to be adversarial. So very few deniers are actually willing to engage with me. I am willing to engage with any of them that has a substantial following. Like, and again, I have like, I don't know, 500, 600 Twitter followers. So that's my
600,
definition.
yeah.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah,
But
your tweet went
that's my,
viral. Hmm.
yeah, that's my definition of a substantial following. So it can be a lot of people, but they have to be willing to talk. And I find that most of you guys aren't, which makes me suspect that you're charlatans and you actually don't have a,
Yeah,
yeah.
the funny thing about like old hype is like one time we had like a small argument over the Holocaust, and
Hmm.
sometimes later I was like, I want to have you for an interview. If you want, we don't have to talk about it. And he like spoke out at me for no reason and then blocked me. Like the guy is literally insane. But yeah,
Yeah,
side comment.
he accused
Um,
me of being Jewish too. Like it's like
oh
I'm
yeah.
not Jewish, guys.
Well, that would totally destroy your
Yeah,
entire argument.
but it's
They
just funny
think.
because I'm really not Jewish. But anyway, let's keep going.
Well, I mean, he could have just like instead
Yeah,
of
no, no, yeah,
recording the
yeah,
scope videos about how there's like a ton of evidence for literally
yeah,
anything, just like for the Holocaust, he could have just said, "Oh, Raul Hilberg, you're Jewish, so you know
yeah. Right.
the
Yeah.
Holocaust has been debunked." So there's a question to me, Ubersoy, when are you going to interview Hitler hated Christ? Well, whenever he shows up, I have invited him to an interview, so he has to message me in DM. You look very Jewish, so that's a comment to you. What happened to your hairline, boy?
Yeah.
um, sorry.
No,
Just
fair enough.
um, last question. If you're not responding to the live chat, then why are you doing this live? We are now responding
Yeah.
to it. Um, so a question to me: will you ask questions from the live chat? Yes, I'm doing that now. How about the doors? I don't know.
Yeah. So this is a so the doors were this is one of the most primitive Holocaust denial memes. So they say, how can there have been wooden doors? How could you possibly create a gas chamber with wooden doors? Well, the first point I'd say is this. Both sides of this debate, as it were, it's not really a debate, but both sides of this debate recognize that they were gas chambers at Auschwitz, right? Both sides recognize it. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Both sides recognize there were non-homicidal gas chambers, namely the delousing chambers, and the
Mm-hmm.
delousing chambers had wooden doors, right? So
Mm-hmm.
clearly, in this case, wooden doors are possible. Now, the wooden doors were reinforced. I'm going to get the specific technical language. Um, just so I get this exactly right, the wooden doors were reinforced with they had like locks attached to them. They were reinforced by layers of metal and felt. I'm not sure specifically how to describe them, but they weren't simply
Mm-hmm.
wooden doors. They were reinforced by a layer of metal with locks. So, yeah.
Okay. Which camp had bear and eagle cage matches?
Well, okay. So let's talk about witness testimony because that's what this question
Yeah.
raises. So, um, the fact that some witnesses, whether it's to war or genocide, say absurd things does not mean that the event is discredited. So, for example, in the First World War, in the Battle of Mons, soldiers who were on the field of battle claimed they saw supernatural beings, right? Absurd. They didn't. Um, so, how do we infer from that there was no Battle of Mons or no World War One? Of course not. Adolf Hitler, who was a military veteran of the First World War, and in point of fact, actually ran pretty serious risks as a dispatch runner to get your legs blown off with that kind of assignment. He lied
Mm-hmm.
about capturing all these Frenchmen in some gesture of great heroism. It doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
he wasn't in the war. It doesn't mean the war didn't
Yeah.
happen. So it's just a stupid argument. Human beings lie, exaggerate, use poetic license. It doesn't. This is meaningless,
Yeah, I
really.
mean, the thing about testimonies and the Holocaust is like there are, just like about any event, a lot of some testimonies which present a distortion view of reality. But we know which testimony is right if it happens to be also confirmed by other people. So if something was seen by like 95% of the people who are involved in the event versus something that were seen just by 1% of the people, uh, you could say that the 95% or the 99% is the most accurate one.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So okay. So um, the Enigma code was used for military purposes to communicate with German forces. Why would it be used talking about extermination camps?
Well, in terms of decoding, the British not only decoded military transmissions, but were able through their code breaking to decode internal SS messages concerning the maintenance of the main concentration camp system. So they were able to see reports, for example, on the number of Jews deported to X camp, and then the roll call in X camp later. These records are far from perfect, certainly, but they do provide us quite a bit of detail on how many Jews were going in, how many Jews were going out, and again, support the inference that, well, I mean, um, necessitate the inference that millions of Jews were just vanishing in these camps.
Hmm. Okay. What does History Speaks think about the Holocaust roller coaster?
I just would say like the previous thing. They're absurd. When people experience traumatic events, it's genocide or war. You get some witnesses who embellish. These are cherry picked. Um, it doesn't mean anything. It's like saying, as I'll just repeat my point. It's like saying that the soldiers who claim to have seen ghosts, supernatural beings in the Battle of Months, prove the Battle of Months did not happen. It's just a logical inference. And if you read history, you find people who experienced extraordinary trauma in these crazy events saying crazy things. Now, by the way, this is a cherry picking. You're looking at a huge body of witnesses. You have hundreds of thousands of people who survived these camps out of the many millions deported there. So under 10%, obviously, but slave laborers who survived, and you're cherry picking the craziest accounts. And then some of these are also just invented. Like the masturbation machines was written by just a fraud who
Yeah.
was never in a concentration camp, was not Jewish, etc. So some of these are just invented.
Whoa,
Uh,
I didn't know there was a claim about masturbation machines. I thought it was like a
that wasn't a
joke by,
claim. No,
not
there was a
by
guy who wrote a
officials, but
Oh no, there was a guy who wrote a memoir who ended up
mhm.
not like being a total fraud and wasn't.
Yeah,
Yeah. By
yeah,
the way, I have a
that's
picture of the wooden doors with like the metal reinforcements
yeah.
with
Just
the.
send me the link. I'll add it in the
Yeah,
description
yeah,
when it's uploaded.
yeah.
So,
Because I think I
I
was a little
guess
slow on that one.
we could
Yeah.
say that the question asked about the Holocaust or human lab chains and human soap to be solved. Although one thing I do remember in my high school, I was taught about human soap and lampshades. So the teacher who taught it clearly thought that it was real, which is unfortunate. Um,
Oh, I think there's some debate about
oh,
whether there
there's a
was
debate.
no. It certainly
Hmm.
wasn't. There certainly was no human soap
Okay.
manufactured at any kind of systematic level. I think there's some claims, which I don't know about the evidentiary standard, and I'm not vouching for them, that this was done at a very limited ad hoc basis. I don't even know if Jews were the alleged victims, but don't hold me to that. It's certainly the claims that were made are false, right? That this was systematically done by the Nazis, and the claims are false, generally
Okay.
speaking. They're either
Mhm.
entirely false or 95% false.
Okay. So another question. While I can say a Holocaust by bullets is reasonable, if you legalize the murder of Jews, you get a dispersed die-off. But the mass gassings of 6 million was probably not a thing.
Um, so what does this person say so I can repeat it?
Well, he's saying that basically you should have shoot them by bullets as opposed to gassing 6 million, which I mean, not 6 million weren't gas in the first place, but
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the question is based on a misunderstanding of what the
yeah,
Holocaust
yeah,
is. So,
yeah.
and it's kind of just a guy expressing his opinion. He's not like pointing to a premise I can rebut. So,
Yeah,
okay.
true, true. Well, I mean, you could rebut, I guess. He's basically saying that, like, why did they build all these,
Oh,
gas
okay.
chambers when?
Well, yeah, I answered that
Yeah,
earlier.
yeah,
Where,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Okay, you should debate Mike Enoch.
yeah. I should. I get in contact with him. Like
um,
he agreed to debate publicly. I offered to translate documents for him. He's running away from me. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Get them to debate me. Like, I'm
after
sure there are TRS subscribers among.
you have debated that guy Martial Law, I believe.
Yeah,
I think like it was basically over. Nobody would ever debate you. So
yeah.
you can just appear on podcasts with people that already agree
Jim
with you.
Rizzoli did. Jim Rizzoli is quite sincere. He believes in Holocaust now. I suspect, and I'm inclined to speculate in this regard because of his dishonesty at this point, but I suspect Mikey Young doesn't actually believe in Holocaust. Come
Mm-hmm.
on, come on. Like you got like,
Yeah.
again.
So.
I'll go back to the first
Mhm.
thing I said, guys. You need, if you want to play history, you need to get an explanation for how these millions of people disappeared in Nazi custody with evidence, right? Get an explanation with evidence. Find evidence of resettlement. If it would be so easy to blow my mind if you could find an evidence of a settlement of Jews who were sent from these camps, sent out of the camps and resettled somewhere. If you found like a building or a letter, it would be trivially easy to blow my mind. And you can't find any evidence of your alternative explanation. It's
Mhm.
conspiracy theories at the end of the day. You say, oh no, the Allies lied about how many Jews they found. There were millions at the end of the war still. Okay, they faked the documents. Guys, there's no evidence for any of this. It's just childish.
Mhm. Um, do deniers also deny the Barbarossa extermination squads?
You mean Einsatzgruppen? Um, I think they're more, well, the Einsatzgruppen is so ridiculous. Like they literally talk about, we killed this many Jews today, we killed that many Jews the other day. This town is Judenrein.
Yeah.
Like it's so specific, and there's pictorial evidence that I think they tend to like. Oh, so the Carlo Matonio's argument is that the Einsatzgruppen themselves exaggerate how many Jews they shot to impress the Germans, but they didn't actually shoot 1.3 million.
Okay.
It's an interesting argument because, first of all, if you believe the argument, I mean, there are many problems with it, but if you believe that argument, then clearly the policy was extermination because they're lying that they've killed all the Jews in these areas. So it either, if you're exaggerating the number killed and showing you've killed all of them in this city, that city, and so on, then obviously the policy of the government is extermination. So they tend to be a little more ambiguous with the Einsatzgruppen, though, because it's, I mean, like you have numerous documents from the Germans themselves saying this. Um, yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of equally stupid in my view to deny gassings at the Reinhardt camps or Auschwitz-Birkenau, really.
Okay, so what I wanted to say. Yeah, I'll be reading like three more questions slash comments, and then like we could, move to the end of this. So the first one is debate Jim Rizzoli again. He's definitely up for it. That's
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay. I'm open to doing this. Jim is a bit of a exhausting social companion. Let's put it that way.
Mhm.
So I'm not necessarily eager to, but I am open to it.
Okay.
If I said, by the way, if someone says someone says that I told Jim at the end I will debate him again. If I said that, I have to do it because I want to keep my word. But I haven't been able
Mhm.
to find that, but I'll look and see. I'm open to it, but I want to debate other people first. If it's only Rizzoli, then I suppose that's my thing.
Okay,
So
so here are two questions which are basically the same in essence, and to an extent we have already went over it, but just
mhm.
maybe we should do it again. Witness testimony can be wrong, but not
Mhm.
defeated Nazi testimony taken who are being threatened and tortured. So that's the first one, and the second one. Do you think that the SS soldiers who said that extermination happened could have also imagined it? Just saying.
Okay,
Yeah.
so no. This is something. So when we're talking about exaggerated witness testimonies and fabricated or whatever, we're not talking about witnesses getting the big picture wrong of extermination. We're talking about exaggerating. Oh, and there was this machine doing X, Y, and Z. But where the witnesses all converge virtually is there was an extermination policy going on. So there's a difference there. Regarding the Nazis, um, actually, I don't. Maybe I'm in the minority here, but I don't put as much weight in what people say at trial. Um, I don't think the
Mhm.
Nuremberg trial was rigged or whatever. There's no evidence of that. But I don't put it, there's so many motives other than telling the truth at work in a trial, right? Whether fair or unfair trial, that I just don't think it's a great place for history. But if you noticed, I quoted all people who were talking in non-coercive, non-judicial contexts yeah, we did this. So it just
Yeah.
is totally
Yeah.
implausible that, yeah, people exaggerate traumatic events or use poetic license. People don't just say, yeah, I murdered that child if they didn't. Like, especially all of them are saying this, right? And
Hmm.
they're doing it in non-coercive context. So, yeah, I find that those confessions very, very compelling. And I mentioned many of them. Again, these are not people being tortured. They're not even in trial. They're like, I'm voluntarily writing a letter, talking to a fellow Nazi, writing their memoirs in fucking in the Levant, in the case of El Hosseini, in Arabic,
Hmm.
and people are mad at him because they're like, no, don't say the Holocaust happened. It hurts our cause. Um, and or Gustav Wagner talking to BBC. These are not people being tortured. They're voluntary statements. Yeah.
Okay. Well, here's a question, a more curious question. I think that that's the last question I will read from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
So, what happened to European Jews? How many there were before the war? How many immigrate, and how many survived?
Yeah, so if we're looking at the immigration figures, the refugee figures, while we don't have an exact estimate, the refugee estimates would be you'd have a few 100,000 German Jews who left before the war via immigration. And you also have a number, we don't know exactly how many, but it's in the low hundreds of thousands of Polish Jews who were deported to the Soviet interior in 1940.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the two big survivor populations. And these Jewish refugees, obviously the Polish Jews specifically went to the Soviet interior, but these mostly German, but also some Polish and obviously Austrian and Sudeten, I guess you'd say, I don't know, Jews immigrated all over the world. So there are many refugees. There's like 1,000 who went to British India. There are tens of thousands who went to God, like in Shanghai, because Shanghai was like an international city where there was like the British had jurisdiction to some extent, etc. Like some ended up in Africa, but we're talking about a total, and of course the Western Hemisphere, but we're talking about totals in the hundreds of thousands, the low hundreds of thousands, low to mid hundreds of thousands for the Jewish refugees, and then you have a few 100,000 deported to the Soviet interior. So if you look at pre-war Jewish populations and the decimation that occurred, decimation of several million. I mean, we have documentary studies, not just from academics after the war and so on, but from the Nazis themselves that show there was a decimation of many, many millions of Jews, and the refugee movements don't even come close to accounting for that. Actually, I'm interested in the question of the refugees.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting one. I was in India several weeks ago. I was in India for about a month for research, and I learned more about a little more than 1,000 Jews who went to India during World War II. The British actually interned the Indians with German nationality as enemy aliens during the war. Interestingly enough, so um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I've got a few questions of my own. So last time I asked you about the academic state of the Holocaust
Mm-hmm.
debate. So you basically laid out like a what's it called, a representation of the mainstream narrative and like how debates are occurring now. But I was wondering if there are any like Holocaust deniers who are also participating in that. I know that what's his name, the guy on who went on trial
Irving,
with Deborah Lipstadt.
yeah,
What was
Irving,
his
yeah,
name?
David Irving.
Yeah, David Irving. Yeah, I mean, I know I think he was the last one. I
Yeah,
think.
but
Are
had like
there
some
any?
mainstream. Yeah, like Irving's work was always regarded as contentious, but people were impressed. Even like mainstream historians like Hugh Trevor Roper were impressed by his ability to unearth new historical documents and this kind of obsessive, minute knowledge of Hitler. And so he was
Mhm.
considered to have some value, even though he should be read carefully. And then his reputation was really destroyed in the trial because it was shown that he wasn't just biased, right? And
Yeah,
making
he
he was
faked
lying.
some.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That's
He like made
unfortunate.
stuff up, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
um, Irving was the last one. Ernst Nolte was never a Holocaust denier, but at some point, Ernst Nolte, a famous German conservative historian, who died, I think in 2016. Don't hold me to that, but actually his book on fascism is very influential on my thinking about fascism.
Hmm.
Um, so Nolte was never a Holocaust denier, but was like, I think he was like privately receptive to, open-minded to it, but he looked into it and he's like, that's bullshit, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But he's about the closest to mainstream. I mean, and again, he didn't believe in it. So he looked in, he was like, there were letters where he's like saying, maybe they're onto something. Look into it. And then he's like, they're full of shit. So
yeah, yeah. I also remember like watching a video of on your channel of David Irving changing
right.
a lot of his stances on the Holocaust, or basically turning to accept the mainstream narratives about the deaths.
Yeah.
Um, which
Actually,
is I
this
didn't
is an
know about
interesting
that.
point. The smarter Holocaust deniers, David Irving, David Cole, and Mark Weber, have moved to this weird pedantic position where they accept the Einsatzgruppen mass shootings, they accept
Hmm.
gassing at the Reinhardt camps, they even accept gassing at Auschwitz, but they say it wasn't in the cremas, it was in the bunkers. I mean, it's like
Okay.
they're obsessed with like whether these buildings, which they were, of course, but they're obsessed with this question. They've retreated so far from their original positions that now they're like saying, yes, it was a death camp, but these buildings weren't. I mean, which they were. It's like, guys, give up on it. And also, Eric Hunt, a very prominent Holocaust denier, um, admitted basically to lying in many cases, and also has repeated his views. So a lot of deniers. Here's something that's funny. A lot of there's nobody that I know of. I mean, I've never heard of anybody who was active. Now, people on the internet can say, "I used to be the best Holocaust historian, now I'm a denier." But like, I want to see proof of what people say. No, that's a convenient. I want to see proof of what people say, right?
Hmm.
There are multiple provable cases of very prominent Holocaust deniers who have recanted their views entirely, mostly, like Irving, Cole, Mark Weber, like fucking IHR director, for God's sake, they can't even get.
Yeah,
They can't
I
get the
do.
IHR
Mhm.
director. Holocaust now can't persuade the IHR director. But there are. Let me finish this point though. There are no
Mhm.
cases that I know of, and I'm pretty confident that there are zero where you have somebody who contributed to mainstream history on the Holocaust and then went the other way. So
Yeah, yeah. I do remember, like, to just add upon what you were saying, being like looking through my comment section, then some guy, a subscriber of mine who I've known like for some time, he was basically like, you're well, your videos are well researched, blah 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 blah, but how could you like believe in the Holocaust? I mean, that's clearly so fake in every
yeah,
way. um so like, it's just like curious to me as to why they would like never actually read any of the mainstream sources that they're supposedly critiquing. I mean, I suppose the Holocaust denial slash revisionist position actually doesn't sound so bad when it's put against like some delusional like popular culture understanding of the Holocaust. But I mean, the moment they're actually going and trying to challenge the mainstream sources which are academic, it just like it's basically game over for
yeah.
them.
I mean, yeah. Well, I mean, again, it comes back to the central issue. You need to explain how these millions of people disappeared in Nazi custody. We have a narrative with a ton of evidence. You need a narrative, or you're just not participating in historical discourse. I mean, you may be participating in some new discipline that you may want to invent, but it's not history as is defined in Western academics.
Yeah, I do remember like one Holocaust like denier, which quote unquote got red pilled on the Holocaust. The reason he got red pilled on the Holocaust was because he thought, well, it's so unlikely that it was exactly 6 million.
Oh my god.
And that guy
Yeah,
probably
actually,
has
to get a master's in history or a PhD, you have to say exactly 6 million.
yeah.
You can if
And
you can say 6 million and one, but then you'll get a bachelor's in history if you say 6 million and one.
yeah, if you say it was 5,900,900 1999, then you'd be denying the Holocaust. stuff
Look,
here.
denial is 2 points about denial. Well, and one thing that irritates me about denial is like the combination of smugness and ignorance just kind of has always pissed me off. Because like I'm the kind of guy, I have many flaws, but I'm the kind of guy who does my homework when I get interested in a subject. Like I do a lot of research, whether it's in history or something else. And to see people lacking just extremely basic knowledge. Like earlier, we mentioned the swimming pool. Again, not in Birkenau, not where the Jews were killed. These pictures of this healthy soccer team, not Jews, right? British POWs. So like just when you don't do the basics and you act so smug, it does kind of piss me off. And I also think
Yeah,
there's another problem here where it's I'm against the current thing, right? So you assume everything the mainstream says is false. You should
hmm,
be skeptical of the mainstream. They say things that are
yeah,
false, right? Mainstream academia says things that are not supportable all the time. But you have to look into specific claims. You can't just say everything they say is false, so I'm going to go eat shit, right?
yeah, yeah. Uh, that's so a crafted response. So here's like my last, I guess, substantial question. Um, which Holocaust themed books would you recommend for viewers to read? So I'm not obviously talking about memoirs, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
glad that you also agree with me that they aren't good evidence. So I'm talking about books in the style of like the destruction of European Jewry, but something I didn't finish it, by the way. Something which is like maybe a few hundred pages, and something which does best to summarize the evidence about the Holocaust, and hopefully also about the victims who are not Jewish. Like if there is a
Hmm.
book of that caliber. Um,
Yeah. So for victims so earlier I mentioned that the gassing statistics are a little hard to come by for non-Jewish victims in Auschwitz, but we do have a lot of good data about how many millions of Polish Gentiles, and Russian Gentiles, and so on were killed, and Soviet POWs through German genocidal policies. Two good introductory texts on this are Mark Makauer's Hitler's Empire and Timothy Snyder's Bloodlines. I know some people may not like Timothy Snyder. Timothy Snyder wrote an absurd book about how Trump is a Nazi or
mhm.
something. I didn't read that,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's ridiculous. But he speaks several languages. He knows his stuff when it comes to the history of the Second World War. So I recommend those two books. In terms of learning about the Holocaust, I think a good book actually is, if you're interested in doing serious research, I think a good book for learning about the Einsatzgruppe, and there's, I think, maybe not recently, I don't know, but I found this in my local library. There is a copy of the Einsatzgruppen reports in English, so it has like almost all the reports, the vast majority of the reports, and just in plain language. So it's like a primary source document. It's like, even if you don't speak German, you can do research. It's a primary
Hmm.
source document where you can learn about how the Einsatzgruppen was shooting the vast majority of Jews in their remit. Um, I think in terms of Hitler's role in the Holocaust, the chapter in Ian Kershaw's book called Ian Kershaw's biography of Hitler, it's called Hitler. The chapter called Fulfilling the Prophecy is an excellent treatment of
Hmm.
Hitler's role, which um, is approving, but not always leading the initiatives. He's seeing what's happening, he's approving it,
Hmm.
and people are escalating. It's kind of like a dynamic process, and then eventually, obviously, as the policy homogenizes, Hitler is explicitly issuing an order at some point. I
Okay.
think that's a good source. I also think the Unwritten Order for Hitler's role, the Unwritten Order by Peter Longerich, which I think was translated into English in 2016, and under that title is a good book. In terms of Auschwitz, I think that the classic treatment is still the best one. Not well, I don't know. It kind of is a classic. It's Jean-Claude Pressek's Auschwitz Technique and Operation of the Gas Chambers. And then for general history of I mean, if you want to get, I think those books are good if you want to get like evidence. Like the Einsatzgruppen reports, Pressek's book. For just general narratives, Hilberg's is still good. Christopher Browning has good work.
Well, I'm talking about something about like which analyzes the motives, which analyzes how it happened, and which also analyzes the data, how many people died in
Mm-hmm.
this particular place, why did they die, and
I think Christopher Browning has a book called The Origins of the Final Solution, which I think
mhm.
is excellent at showing the development of the periodical development of German policy. Because again, it you know, in 1939, 1940, 1941, there are marks of a genocidal mentality and there are localized extermination operations, but it isn't systematically done. And the Browning book gives a good account of how it developed from ad hoc and limited and localized to systematic.
Okay,
Um,
well, so if you were to, so for example, a person who now believes in Holocaust revisionism, but he's open to, to hear your arguments, for example, but he doesn't want to read like an 800 page book, what like starting book would you recommend to him to read?
mm, I actually think part of the reason I've gotten into this is I think a lot of the anti-denial stuff is really bad. I think Schirmer is really bad, and I think
Hmm.
Lipstadt is just so
Well,
bad.
Lipstadt is, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. Listen, if you don't want to read like books, listen to me because again, like historians aren't really so like now there's woke and like you're just evil if you talk to someone with extreme views, which is kind of a new norm. But like
Hmm.
30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, historians just weren't thinking about denial because it's just absurd.
Yeah.
Like, so there hasn't been that much response to denial. Like, I mean, there's like me and Nick Terry among, and then there are people who I'd regard as historians but don't have formal credentials, like
Uh-huh.
at Holocaust controversies. But like in terms of like credentialed people, by the way, those people, many of the non-credentialed people know a lot more than I do about the Holocaust, to be honest. Like these
Hmm.
Holocaust controversies guys. But so I'm not saying credentials are everything. I'm just talking about like the academy. People
Hmm.
who have like some, like I'm not even in it yet, but I'm going to be presumably.
Hmm.
People who have like some historical credentials. It's like me and Nick Terry. I think that's it.
Okay.
Who engage
Yeah.
with people, and then the stuff written in the past, like Michael Shermer. I mean, my God, Michael Shermer was irresponsible. He went on television with David Cole and like lost because his best argument was, "Oh, why is there so much Zyklon B delivered to the camps?" Like the deniers have a response to that, right?
Hmm.
Deniers have a response to that, bro. I mean, and he wanted to get involved in this because he saw it was kind of a hot taboo issue, and I don't think his work is good. Lipstadt, I don't think is serious really either.
Yeah, I mean, I think she said that, for example, if you're saying that the Holocaust was
Mm.
also about like
Mm.
the Germans killing systematically
Mm-hmm.
non-Jews, you're a Holocaust denier.
Right. She
Uh,
says you're engaged in soft denial. So
yeah.
basically, she's helping deniers by making the concept of Holocaust denial nonsense or making it a matter of reasonable opinion. So if or just any opinion, like you can say it's reasonable or unreasonable. So if you say, I think Polish Christians should be considered Holocaust victims, I think that's a totally reasonable position
Yeah.
personally. But like, that's not even a historical position, strictly speaking. It's kind of a moral position. And would she say you're a soft denier? Like the
Yeah, I
woman's
mean,
ridiculous.
the museum of the U.S. Holocaust Museum, for
Mm-hmm.
example, the total amount of Holocaust deaths, it's at least 11 million. So they clearly consider them to be victims as
Norman
well.
Finkelstein said
Uh,
Lipstadt like looked like
mhm.
vaguely comatose in her, and she was like meeting with the Saudis for some reason.
Yeah,
Like it
well,
was
I
like
mean,
some
she's
religious tolerance thing.
a very ideologically biased,
Yeah, it's
unfortunately.
just, and she's not a trained historian. You know what I
Yeah.
think was so ridiculous that she didn't speak in her
Hmm.
trial. Like she didn't speak in her trial. Come on, this is your work, and you have the facts on your side. It's not like Irving has to stress out. He has to
Well,
defend. He has to defend why is this building called a gas? In his trial, Irving at one point, I don't know if you recall this, but he actually ended up because of the Vergassungskeller document that says
mhm.
Prima 2, which Irving said was not a gas chamber, and we say obviously was a homicidal gas chamber. Irving ended up having to defend the idea that they were gassing corpses.
Okay.
Yeah, because they wanted to purify the corpses so then they could take
I don't know if you
valuable stuff with them.
watched the movie about the Nile
Uh,
part, but basically, I think the reason she didn't speak in the trial was that she was afraid that like he'll of emotional damage or something. Oh no, the her lawyer what was basically saying, oh, you don't want to like be emotionally damaged by it, which is kind of
Yeah, it's
funny.
just really pathetic. She has a million times stronger case. If you come remotely well prepared, you're not an idiot. Like
Yeah.
nobody who is in the middle is going to be persuaded for the denial side in a one-to-one exchange. Irving was a great when he was younger. Irving was a fantastic public speaker, but still, like he ended
Hmm.
up. I guess I say, look at the I'm not getting this in the film. I'm getting this in the transcript. Irving had to say because of the document referring to Crema 2 as a gassing cellar. Irving said it's for gassing cadavers because the Nazis were going to take, were going to like remove value jewelry and teeth from the corpses, so they had to delouse the corpses first.
Yeah, well, that's weird. Anyways, so I promised you that would be the last question, but
Mhm.
turns out my friend just messaged me on Telegram, and I think that's a very important question, and I'm actually surprised I didn't ask you this. But do you talk about, well, a question to you, talk about the Nazi Germany motives? Revisionists say Third Reich did not kill Jews on purpose. So, I
So
mean,
can I talk about,
but
Nazi Germany's motives?
yeah,
Actually, the specific
mhm,
motives are debated. So obviously, part of it is anti-Semitism, right? They regard the Jews as evil and subhuman, and that
mhm,
they started the war. That so it's not like we are totally floating in the dark. But the role of practical ideology plays a big role. Everybody knows that. But the role of practical considerations is very much debated because the earliest extermination facility, Kelmno, was developed in order to remove excessive population from a particular Gau in Poland. Right, it's a Jewish
mhm,
population that couldn't be fed, could be the source of the pandemic. So there's a pragmatic element to this. There also is a pragmatic element to killing non-working Jews, just the general policy of killing all the non-working Jews while allowing the working ones to live or even recover. Right, so if they got sick, they could recover and go to this hospital that the Holocaust deniers are obsessed with. Like so, but there's kind of an economic rationale to this. Obviously horrible, but like the ones who can work for your war, you keep. The ones who can't, you kill because they cost money to feed and so on. Um, so this is actually, I should have mentioned this earlier. This is continues to be debated in historiography. What was the role of ideology or the role of practical considerations? Personally, I think ideology I think that practical considerations may have spawned early extermination operations, but at some point, Hitler specifically, in Hitler's view that the Jews caused the war, becomes the driving force, and you see that because the policy is so homogeneous, right? It's just extraordinarily
mhm.
homogeneous. Even the history of genocide, I think, with maybe the exception of Cambodian genocide, you don't have cases where you're like killing babies, systematically, like killing
Yeah.
every baby. Yeah. So I think this how radically systematic it becomes attests to an ideological motivation. However, early extermination operations certainly had pragmatic, not partially non-ideological motivation. I say partially because obviously they wouldn't just massacre Germans. I mean, there is the T4 program, of course, but they wouldn't just massacre Germans, civilians, the way they massacred Jews if there was some pragmatic benefit
Mhm,
to be had.
mhm. Yeah. Okay. So I guess.
Debated issue though. Debated issue by academics.
Mhm.
Ideology, everyone agrees ideology played some role. Was it all ideology or was it practical at any level, the policy?
Okay, so I'll just read a few. A few people have asked you to debate Dr. Nicholas Colorstorm, that's one, and then also Jeremy Rudolph, and E. Michael Jones, so three people.
Um, I actually would debate all of those people.
Also
Um,
Richard Williamson, Bishop Richard Williamson. I don't know like
I
more
don't
than
know about
half of these
Williamson.
people. I just know
I
one
know
person,
Germar
E. Michael
Rudolph. I've talked
Jones.
to Rudolph. Rudolph is like has some visa issue right now. I actually in a video, a recent video I
Oh,
made.
yes, you
Yeah,
said yeah, they shouldn't, ban
yeah.
him
No, they
from
shouldn't. They
entering. Yeah, I
shouldn't.
remember.
Well, I
Hmm.
mean, I think he has he had like some lewd conduct charge. He was like naked in the park or something. I mean,
Oh.
I don't know. He says it was a frame or they didn't understand. Who knows? I don't say that's a 0% chance that he was like wearing European hot pants and people got
Okay.
confused. But the authorities said he was naked, and I think that for some reason he has trouble with his visa in the United States, and if he loses his visa, he'll have to go back to Germany where he'll be prosecuted. And obviously, I'm violently opposed to this. Not only do I think it's morally wrong to prosecute him like this, but it also is like the best argument for Holocaust deniers. Like the only compelling argument they make, there's two arguments they've made against me that I found compelling. The first is that you're fat, Matthew. So like, yeah, that's the point. It's a personal flaw. Second of all is this, and more compelling, is this point about its censor. Yeah, you shouldn't have historical event censored. I will say though, Holocaust denial is not the only censored historical event, right? In
Hmm.
Poland, for example, denial of the Katyn massacre, saying that the Soviets didn't do it, is criminalized. So just because it's criminalized doesn't mean it's false. Because if you believe that, then you're going to have to deny all kinds of genocides, because all kinds of genocide people. There's a meme that Holocaust denial is the only form of genocide denial that's legal. That's banned anywhere. That's totally false. But nevertheless, these laws are I think odious, and they're dangerous because like, so Holocaust denial is a joke. It's really stupid. But you know, of course there can be misuse of the term genocide, and in general, we can't have a system where the state bans discussion of whether X event equals genocide. So it's very dangerous, and I oppose it. Not only because it helps deniers, but there are many reasons to be against these laws, and even censoring them on social media, I condemn quite vigorously.
Yeah, same. So I mean, just very last one. I'm not entirely sure what it's all about, but basically there's like I guess a meme going on in my chat. The so-called 1C conference.
Vanzi.
I deny the 1C conference. That's all that matters, and that's a comment. It's a response to another comment saying, "Do deniers deny the 1C conference?" And the guy who denies the 1C conference doesn't want to be ignored. So he is now the center of our attention.
Okay, yeah, wow. I don't know that deniers even deny the Wannsee conference. They just try to say it's not. I mean, the Wannsee conference, I would argue, again, contrary to some historians, that we're still, I think, Wannsee, I want to make sure I get the date right. I think it's January 42, not February. I want to make sure I get that right, though. I don't want to spread. Oh, okay, 20 January. All right. Thank you, Wikipedia. Okay, so the Wannsee conference, the protocols of the Wannsee conference show that they talked about working Jews to death. And there's some vague language about how Jews will be conscripted into work, slave labor, basically, and the great majority of them will perish through this process, and then the possible surviving remnant will have to be dealt with accordingly. So I think you're kind of an idiot if you don't think that's genocidal language. But I would argue, contrary to some scholars, that the policy of annihilating all European Jews, not just Poles, not just Russians,
Hmm.
not just Germans, because I think all Poles, Russians, Germans have already been marked for death, certainly by January
Yeah.
2014, but also like Dutch Jews, because there's more sensitivity about killing Western European Jews. By the way,
Hmm.
by Western, I'm excluding Germany for two
Hmm.
reasons. Germany is Central Europe at the time, not considered Western generally, and second of all, they obviously have more. They don't have to worry about backlash for what they do to their own people the way they have to
Yeah.
worry about. Yeah. So there was more sensitivity about killing Western European Jews, and I think that the policy to kill them comes later. Actually, comes in the beginning of the summer of 42. But Wannsee does contemplate, though, taking the Jews and working them to death, and then dealing accordingly with the possible surviving remnant. I mean, I think that's clear. It's clearly a genocidal intent. The
Yeah.
question is,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. But
Anyways, let's have like three blitz questions. So the first one
people
is,
are waking up. Neo Nazis are waking up. Is that?
yeah, well, I think
Don't
there,
sleep in, Nazis. Don't sleep in so much.
yeah, well, probably after this video there'll be a few comments, but,
Yeah,
we'll see. So the first one is favorite goy slope, if you know what it
I
means.
have no idea what that means.
It means favorite fast food. Um,
I've been hitting the gym and eating very well the last week. I'm really trying to cut. So right now, zero fast food in my life.
well, what? Yeah, but like,
Oh, in
if you could
general,
eat, yeah, in general.
uh, God, God, Taco Bell's really gross, but like it's like there's something about it in the middle of the night
Oh,
that
I
makes it
like Burger King. I
like
don't know
Burger King.
about Taco
Okay.
Bell.
I don't know why these places like I've never grown out of liking the taste of this stuff, even as I've traveled the world and had really good food. It's like, why do I like this shit? It's like tastes good, you know?
You should try loaded poutine if you like the Taco Bell.
Oh yeah.
How they make it. Yeah. So the second one is favorite video game in case you play any.
Ah, yeah. Um, I do like games, but I'm kind of old school. I play. This is kind of pathetic to admit, but I play
Okay.
the most contemporary game I like is Dota 2, which is normal. But
Oh.
like the
Mm-hmm.
play two old games from time to time: Civilization 4
Oh,
and
I.
Heroes of Might and Magic 3. I know
Oh
the
my
old
God,
school.
these are my favorite strategy games.
Oh my God,
I
Heroes
used
3
to
and
play
Civ
them
4.
when I was like since I was
Yeah,
four, I think. Since I was five. Well,
yeah. I played them as
Civilization
a
6 since I was 6. So Heroes of Might and Magic 3 since I was 4. Damn.
yeah. They're good ones.
I have the Horn of the Abyss thing, and I sometimes play multiplayer. Um,
I'll play the when the sequel to Baldur's Gate comes out. I'll definitely play that. There's a
oh, I
Baldur's Gate.
don't
I don't
know
know. We'll
about
see.
that.
We'll
What
see.
about like Civilization 6? Is that a good thing? I didn't like it personally. I played like 40
I
hours.
like 4. I like 4. I
Yeah, I
play.
like for the best also.
I don't. The newer ones just don't do it for me. I don't know why.
Well, they've changed like the battle mechanic in 5.
Hmm.
You can have only one unit occupying a tile. In Civilization 4, you could literally stack like 40 units in one spot.
Yeah.
What I would do usually is that I would like shift click on a couple of units and just attack them at the same time right after like I lowered their defense. Yeah, such good games, man. Anyways, so the third question, which book is the most important one that you have ever read, or your favorite book? Well, presumably nonfiction, but if you want, you could like also say one about fiction.
This is a pretty banal choice, but I would probably say Orwell's 1984,
Oh.
which sparked my kind of like seventh grade reading list. So
Mm-hmm.
like people could roll their eyes, but for me, this book sparked my interest. It just was formative because it sparked my interest in politics, history, and language.
Yeah.
So in terms of the most influential book on me, becoming the splendid being you're all feasting your eyes on right now, it probably was Orwell's 1984.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of writing, which I'm intending to do for a living, the most influential thing I've also read is Orwell too, an essay called "Politics in the English Language," which I read in
Oh,
my first year of college.
I think I did read it in a philosophy class I had.
Mm.
So,
Were you a
and
philosophy major, Uber?
no, I'm a poli-sci major.
Okay.
Well, I
By
mean,
the
I've taken a lot of philosophy courses. I've always gotten an A in it. So,
yeah,
unlike other courses.
very necessary info to share there, right?
Yeah. Well, I just
I
wanted
mean,
to
yeah, me
brag a
too.
little
Me
bit.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I got one like B plus in like a theology pseudo philosophy class. But,
Oh,
it shouldn't have been labeled philosophy. I'm very bitter
yeah.
about it.
Yeah. Well, I wanted also to say that, strangely enough, I mean, I do like 1984. I wouldn't say it's like in the top 5 or of my favorite books for certain, but one interesting thing is that Vosh's, you know who Vosh is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. His favorite book is also
Oh
1984.
my. Yeah.
Like I'm just wondering if it's like a manual for him as opposed to what what
Right.
it is for you. um yeah, just strange world.
Yeah.
What about We by Zamyatin, a Russian author who say George Orwell stole his idea from? Did you
I
read it?
haven't. So sorry. Who's this?
um
I'm afraid
Yevgeny Zamyatin, I
The only
think.
Russian authors I know are
No, no, I mean,
Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and Nabokov are the only ones I've read
well,
like
it was,
significantly.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it was an early Soviet
By the way,
writer.
imagine if Nabokov was Jewish. Oh my God, we'd never hear the end
Oh,
of him.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. So I think, like, I'm of the opinion that 1984 was more or less plagiarized to some degree from that book.
Okay, send me
Um,
DM it to me because if my
it's a short
intellectual
book.
if my
Hmm.
adolescence or pre-adolescence intellectual awakening is alive, but you probably know that. So
Well, I mean, with regards to the construction of language, it's like there are lots of parallels. I think it was the first dystopia in the world that was
hmm.
ever written, certainly of that caliber. I will. There you go. I sent you that in the private chat. Yeah. Anyways,
Hmm.
I think that was everything I had. All the questions I had. If you want, we could basically, I don't know, sum it up somehow. If you wanted to say anything, maybe we could interact with the audience. Um,
Yeah, I'll try to just sum up on my points. I know I've said it before, but I'll go in like 90 seconds. So,
mhm.
yeah, basically how I come at this is millions of Jews disappeared in Nazi custody during the war. As a historian, you need a positive explanation for phenomena. You can't just say they disappeared. You have to explain it. And I have a narrative. Historians have a narrative. They were killed. It has tons of evidence. We talked about it. And they have either no explanation for this or they have an explanation that has zero evidence that there were resettlements where the Jews were sent to. It's laughable that there would be no evidence for resettlements of millions in the 1940s. So, yeah, that's kind of you've gotten to the specifics of the huge amount of positive evidence for extermination, but that's kind of the basic frame with which I see this and kind of why I'm a little snotty about deniers being dumb, but not necessarily dumb intellectually, but believing something dumb. So
Mhm.
yeah, believe in their free speech, eager to debate them. That's kind of me. Yeah.
By the way, just a small comment
Mm-hmm.
about the guy who became a Holocaust denier after he told me that the exactly 6 million number was unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
His claimed tested IQ is 137. So,
He claims his IQ is 137.
yeah, it's
Well, I mean,
137.
people. I just don't trust people making assertions about their IQ anymore.
Yeah. Well,
That's just so stupid
yeah.
that like I could actually see an out of context argument could persuade someone or a fraud. Like the Red Cross document is a fraud. Like there's this document that isn't from the Red Cross. It was like faked with the Red Cross logo. It's from a
Hmm.
German governmental department that's about like death certificates, and only refers to registered prisoners at Auschwitz and some other camps, but not the Reinhardt camp. So it's not the overwhelming majority of prisoners wouldn't be included there. And moreover, I believe you have to like apply for a death certificate. So they get an estimate that's like in the hundreds of thousands and it's much lower. Doesn't include Einsatzgruppen or the Reinhardt camps. Doesn't include most people who are in Auschwitz. But yeah, people have run with this and claimed it's from the Red Cross. And so if you heard something like that, I don't know, maybe you could be compelled. Also, confirmation bias is really powerful. So,
There's a comment. I took an IQ test on the back of a crisp packet. Turns out I am 167 IQ.
is that the guy?
It's
I'm actually looking at the live chat now. I
Luke
wasn't
Croft.
before.
His name is Luke
Oh,
Croft.
wow. That's pretty cool, Luke.
My IQ is 60. I'm struggling to write, but the Holy Spirit helps me. Um,
Uh, uh,
yeah.
you
Well,
know,
yeah. I guess we're
that was
just
funny, John.
yeah. It's just there's nothing else we could discuss. I think we could probably end this. Um, where could my listeners and the people who later watch this video find you? Yeah,
I am History Speaks on YouTube, and I am History Speaks on Twitter. So, yeah.
okay. Yeah, that's very easy. Just like Uber soy, everywhere else it's Uber soy.
Yeah.
The same with you. Yeah. Okay. So I guess we'll be ending the broadcast. Thanks for coming. I wanted to make it like under 1 hour and a half, but like we went over the limit, and oh my god, should have probably moderated a little bit better. Last
Yeah.
time we also aimed for like an hour, and then it was 2 hours and a half. So this time it's at least I'm getting better. I'm getting better.
Yeah. We're 2.5. So.
Um,
All right.
mhm. So yeah, thank you for coming, and thanks for
Mhm.
everyone for tuning in and listening.
Thank you guys. Take care, Uber.
Yeah.